Hello everyone, I'm here today to do another weekly reads, and this week was, I think, quite successful in terms of reading. I finished 4 books, so I'm just going to go through them, and then I will talk a little bit about what I want to read in October. The first book that I read this week is The Parisian by Isabella Hammad, and I had a different concept of what this was gonna be from what it was actually about. I thought this was going to be about a Middle Eastern man going to study in Paris or like France, and their experiences there. But actually, that was part of it. It was like the first section of the book was about this Palestinian man going to Montpellier, I think it was, to study medicine. But that was just like a little bit of the book, and then it goes, this man goes back to Palestine, and it actually focuses mainly on the struggle of Palestine and like the formation of the idea of Palestine and Syria as well, because at some point Palestine and Syria could have been one country, but they ended up being 2. So yeah, it goes through that process. It's set up in the 1910s, 1920s, which is when they define these things, when the British and the French left that area. Also, they left Egypt and other countries in the area. So it's kind of the formation of the different countries in Middle Eastern area, and and how those colonizers affected that process as well, which I have never read anything about, and I found really interesting, because of course at this point when we normally read about Palestine is about their struggles with Israel, which are also there. They were already there before Israel was actually a recognized country, but yeah, it's more like it gives a lot more context to the present conflicts that I have never heard discussed, which I'm surprised that I never heard this discussed in the discussion of Palestine and Israel, and all of the other Middle Eastern conflicts. So yeah, it was really interesting. It's also quite apt that I read it this month, or like in September, because Palestine was one of the Invisible Cities countries for September, and I have read another book from Palestine, and I have like been researching and looking up things a little bit about Palestine, so this was at the perfect moment. But I didn't really know that it was about that. I thought it was about the experience in France more than an experience in Palestine. So yeah, that was great. Also, the story is based on the author's grandfather, I think, who really didn't want to get involved. We also get into the family history of this man, that he didn't really want to get super involved. Also, he studied medicine in France, but when he came back, he just wanted to be safe and have a family, so he ended up being part of a store, and then he opened his own store. And yeah, we see that development of his personality and his dreams that are very mundane, but they are not allowed to be mundane in such a strongly political time. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot from this. I think that maybe the narrative and the story itself were okay, but the content of it, like the history, I'm glad that this book has opened my eyes to a bit more of the history of that area and how it has evolved, which I didn't know about, and I want to know more about now. So if you have any recommendations of books set in the Middle East around 1910s, 1920s, when the independence and the formation of these countries happened, I would be really thankful, because I think that's a fascinating thing to explore that I haven't seen explored much. The next book I finished was for my book club, and that was Blue Monday by Nicci French. So this is a book, it's a thriller book that I have seen Nicci French before in BookTube, and Nicci French is a couple, a married couple that writes books together. And this is, in particular, this one is about the disappearance of two children, 20 years apart or something like that. And there is this psychiatrist, Frida, that gets involved in the case of solving this mystery of who killed these children, or what happened to these children. And yeah, I think that the writing was quite good. I wanted to keep reading, and it was very engaging, but the story itself was quite unbelievable. Like the fact that Frida is a psychiatrist and she just goes to talk to people that were involved with people that are involved in the case, and she's just like, yeah, I'm not the police, I'm just a doctor, but I want to know the address of this and this and this person, and she just gets it. Or like things like, I don't know, there were some quite unbelievable situations, and the plot twists were quite tropey. So yeah, I didn't like the story. I did like the writing, but not the story. I think that it was just too much for me. Yeah, I'm glad I tried Nicci French, but and I'm glad that we read it in a book club so we could talk about these things. But I think I have enough with this. This was enough. Then the last physical book that I read this week was The Address book, and this is a non-fiction about how addresses shape our view of the world and our possibilities. So it talks a lot, and each chapter talks a lot about different aspects of addresses. So for example, the fact that in India the slums don't have addresses, and that prevents people from being able to vote, have safety and security, and jobs sometimes. We take those things for granted, right? If you start a new job and you get a new contract, they just ask for your address and you just give it and never think about it. But there are people that don't have addresses, and that's for people in the slums, that's for people that are homeless. They don't have an address to give, and that limits their possibilities to get identity cards, passports, jobs, all of these things. And that obviously affects disproportionately certain castes or certain races in different countries. But not everything was like connected to social issues. Like there were also things like who names the streets and what kind of names do they give, and also things like in Japan it doesn't work by streets, it works by blocks, and she makes a connection that in Japanese the Japanese writing is also kind of in blocks, so it makes sense for them that they make their streets in blocks, because that's also how their writing works, whereas in Latin alphabet based languages we write in lines, so it makes sense that we organize our streets in lines. Like our addresses are organized in streets because they're lines, and lines make more sense to us than blocks. I thought that was a very interesting point. There were a lot of talk of places in the US, but I would say it's like half US, half non-US, which I appreciated. There were a few things that I know about the dresses that were not very well covered in the book that I think could have been very interesting to explore. Like, I know that in Costa Rica, if you write a letter, they don't really have proper addresses either, so you will write like the house 3 steps north of the capital with the green door, and everyone knows what that is. And I always found that fascinating. My friends from Costa Rica told me that that's how their addresses work, and I was always fascinated by that fact. And she talks about the fact that in Costa Rica addresses do work different, but she doesn't address how different and why is that, or explore that a little bit more, which I think it's a very interesting thing to explore. So yeah, those things were a few things that I was missing from the book, but overall I thought it was very interesting, even if it was sometimes a bit anecdotal. But yeah, there are things that I never thought about, and yeah, I quite liked it. I think it's very, if that sounds anything interesting to you, how addresses work in other places, I think this is a great book to pick up. The last book I finished this week was an audiobook. Well, I did the last part with physical reading, but it was mostly an audiobook, and that was Germinal by Emile Zola. And this was a fairly classic French book that I have heard good things about. I know that Lauranne loves it, so I finally picked it up, and I can see why. I also very much enjoyed it. Normally classics are not my thing, so I was a bit trepidant to go into this book because, you know, it's a classic. It's quite yeah, it's a bit intimidating, but yeah, I really enjoyed it. Normally classics to me tend to be a lot of like either love stories or like, I don't know, some kind of poor to riches kind of story. Like, I'm thinking Dickens, the Brontes, Jane Austen, that kind of stories. But this was not that, and I found that more in French classics, so maybe French classics are my thing. But this was, I mean, there were love stories and stuff, but the main point of the book was about this group of miners in a mine in France that were obviously exploited by their employees, and their employees don't even, we follow their employers in some chapters, and we see how unaware of these things they are. And yeah, it's a lot about the struggle of the miners to try to make a living and try to have better conditions in life, and some of that is very much related to the discussions of socialism and communism, and also strikes. They go on strike at some point, and also the dangers that they face in the mine. There was a lot of that in this book, and I really enjoyed it. I think that those are still very relevant conversations, which is often the problem that I have with classics, that I think that the conversations that those classic books have is normally solved to a certain extent, and therefore they're kind of outdated. But I think this one was still a conversation that it's worth having right now about our situation right now. So I really appreciated that aspect of the book, and I think that yeah, it's a really interesting one. It's also not very difficult to read in terms of prose. I don't know if it's because of the translation or whatever, but I didn't find it very difficult to read. So yeah, I overall quite enjoyed this book, and it surprised me. I should listen to Lauranne more often because she's right. She's always right. So yeah, I really enjoyed Germinal. And then the last book I want to talk about, I didn't make a lot of progress in A Suitable Boy this week because I was trying to finish all of the other like book clubby library books kind of thing. So I didn't have time to read this much, but this is my only current read at the moment, and I think I'm just going to read this until I finish before I start anything else, because I don't have a lot of plans for October, so I also don't have a lot of library books out, so I think it's time for me to sit down with this and enjoy it finally and not think about any other book. I think that's what I'm going to do. So hopefully I will finish this maybe this week, maybe next week. I don't know. I have still like 500 pages left or so. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to finally focus on this, because I think this book needs it. So now that we have our read and currently reading books out of the way, I wanted to also talk a little bit about my plans for October. So as I said, I don't have a ton of plans for October. I have a couple of books for Invisible Cities that I want to read, and the countries this month are Sweden and Guinea, and then I also want to participate in a couple of book clubs. Zimm has a book club and we are reading Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury, and then the Booker Boy book club was also talking about reading Flowers for Algernon by Something Keys, I think. So I have those in my list of things to read, and then I have also not finished my reread for last month because the book is still not here, so I will read it whenever it comes, but that was Our Sister Killjoy, and that's a very short book and I have already read it. It's kind of prose poetry, so it's I probably can read it in a day. I'm not very worried about that. And then the other book that I wanted to read this month, because I didn't get to it last month, is The Devil on the Cross by Ngugi wa Thiongo. And I wanted to read last month because last month was the Kenyan Readathon, which Lexa Reads organizes, and I was so pumped for it because I love Kenyan, I love Kenyan literature, and it's a great initiative, but with all the Booker stuff I just didn't have time. So I want to at least read one Kenyan book in October just to compensate for that. And then the only other thing that is left is my reread for October. So it doesn't seem like it's going to be a super busy reading month. So that would be nice, just to read whatever I want for a while. Okay, so the book that came out, I don't know if you can see that. It's Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Talking about classics, Frankenstein is one of the few classics that I actually enjoy from the Victorian thing, and since it's Victober, this is quite appropriate. I normally don't participate in Victober because, yeah, English classics don't appeal to me in general, but this one does, and it's Victober, so that's kind of a lucky one to come out of there. So yeah, I'm looking forward to reading that. I have read it 2 times, I think, already, maybe 3. So I do enjoy it. So I'm looking forward to that. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below what you read this week. There's something interesting that you want to talk about, and what you're planning to read in October. I don't know if you like spooky season or not. I don't particularly mind. I'm not that kind of seasonal reader, but I know a lot of people like to read spooky books in October. So let me know if you're one of those people. And until next video, bye!